Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. Glad to have you here this Tuesday afternoon. We're getting toward the end of the day here, so appreciate you joining. I'm always a little bit split whether to start these on time and reward the fellow people like me who always are on time, or to accommodate the people who are running late. I think I'm gonna be on the side of the people who are running late, just in the spirit of UDL and flexibility and variability. So much going on in people's lives. Plus, I'm sure people don't mind a quiet moment in their crazy days. All right, 301. That's good enough for me. Welcome, everyone. Really appreciate you being here to talk about the Universal Design for Learning statewide implementation, and to receive some of the resources that we are sharing with you today. Hoping it's going to be useful for you. Um, Introduce myself and the facilitators here today. My name is Alex Gibson. I'm a senior product designer and learning experience designer at CAST. I'll talk a little bit more about CAST in a little bit here if you haven't heard of us. I'm also joined by Sam Johnston as well, who's our Chief Post-Secondary and Workforce Development Officer. Before we move on, I want to hear who is in the room with us today. So in the chat, if you could share your name and then what school you are representing today, or maybe you're representing a larger organization. Where's everyone coming from? Hope you all are having a nice day in Ohio. Just talking to a neighbor who said that she hopes it doesn't get too hot too quickly, and I thought that was crazy. I can't wait. Belmont, Clark State, Marion, Sinclair, Owens, so many different places. Wonderful to have you all. Stark State. And again, appreciate you being here. Um, Before we get into UDL a little bit, just want to share some of the upcoming webinars that we have as a part of this series. So today you're at the UDL statewide implementation. Next Tuesday, a week from today, there is the faculty-led recruitment strategies and marketing toolkit. I think that's led by our very own Maria. Is that right? Who's with us today?
Yes,
Great.
yep, I'm one of them, and so is OACC and one of our partners from Durango Works.
Wonderful. So that'll be great. And there's a couple of those as well. And then there is a session coming up mid to late April on OER, Open Educational Resources. There's a whole lot more webinars that we have available as well. You can scan the QR code here, or go to that link to make sure you are registered for those. A lot of good information and resources in there. All right, here is our agenda for the day. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about CAST, who we are and what we do. And really the main thing we do is UDL, the Universal Design for Learning. So I'll give a little bit of a background on that. Um, I'll start by giving an overview of this guide that we have created for you on how to implement UDL across your campus or across your department. We'll go over the self-assessment that's included. You'll have a chance to take a look at your own college or department. I know we have a variety of people here and a variety of kind of spheres of influence that you have. So for some people, this webinar is going to be more focused on your whole college. For other people, it might just be your department. It might just even be your own classroom for some of you, or a small community of practice group. That's okay. Any type of influence that we can have and help more people include more learners is great. So I'll have you do a quick little self-assessment to figure out where you are at with UDL implementation. You might actually be farther than you think. Even if you don't know anything about UDL, you might already be doing some pieces of UDL. We'll look at all the different domains of the guide, the areas where you can implement UDL, the different phases that we have for you. So when do you introduce certain areas of this guide? And then we'll end with a Q&A as well. Um, I want you to think about what is your goal for today, and share this in the chat as well. Depending on what you say, I'll shift this webinar to make sure we're covering what folks really want to get out of this. So here are just a few ideas. You don't need to copy these. Might be something else entirely different that maybe I'll be able to get to. But you might want to build an understanding of how to implement UDL across your department, or across your college. You might be here to learn more about UDL itself and how it can help learners. You might just be here to find some resources that you can share with faculty and coworkers, or something else entirely. So in the chat, if you could just share what you want to get out of today, and I'm going to do my very best to follow through with that. Learning more about UDL and how it can help students, find some resources, implementation. Great. Well, we can definitely do all of those things. Um, we will share some additional resources as well. I will tell you that today is mostly focused on how do we implement UDL in a larger system, but there's still going to be some good nuggets for you throughout the day, and we'll share some resources for those who are looking to dive into UDL a little bit more as an individual instructor or faculty also. Um, Something I want you to know about today is to really take what works for you and to leave the rest. So we've designed this to be flexible as much as we can, but every college is different, every position is different, all budgets are different, styles, needs, all of that. So I really encourage you to find things that work for you from this and take those with you. And anything that doesn't work, leave that behind. We understand there's a lot of complexities when it comes to implementation at any level, the college level especially. There's so many complexities and competing priorities and initiatives. So we really hope that you will take this and ultimately make it your own and make it work for you and your context. All right, let's talk about CAST and UDL. First of all, CAST. So CAST are the pioneers of UDL, Universal Design for Learning. And our mission is to lead, inspire, and convene a global community to design equitable, inclusive learning experiences through our Universal Design for Learning framework. So everything we do, and we work from kindergarten to post-secondary and adult education, it's all focused on universal design for learning. That is our thing. We're going to have our first poll here that Maria will set us up with. What is your current familiarity with UDL? Is it new to you? I know the basics. Maybe you've done a little bit of work, or have you worked up to stronger UDL implementation, or would you even call yourself a UDL pro?
Are you seeing the poll, Alex?
Yeah, it looks like all three questions, or all four questions, came through.
Okay, so let me just think about how to focus
Or
on just the first
maybe
question.
I'm not sure. All participants, are you just seeing the first question?
Seeing them all.
No.
Okay, Alex, let me reset it up and I'll come back to it. Okay.
Okay,
Sorry
sounds
about
good.
that. Thanks.
No worries. Get a little teaser. You can see what's coming up next. How exciting. Okay, let me talk a little bit about UDL, and then depending on what people say, I can go into more depth or not, or we can move on. So, Universal Design for Learning is an educational framework based on research in the learning sciences, and it guides the development of flexible and accessible methods, materials, and environments that embrace variability, minimize barriers, and develop learner agency in all learners. That's a mouthful. Let me break down some of those pieces for you. So, first of all, variability. What does variability mean? Variability is so every brain is just as unique as our fingerprints. We all operate and go through the world in very unique ways, and our learning environments need to reflect that. We all have very different motivations for being in whatever learning environment we're in. We have different ways that we perceive information depending on the context, and we need different ways of having that information represented to us. Um, and we all have different ways of showing what we know, of showing what we learned from a certain experience. And so the basis of UDL is to make sure that all of those things are flexible and we're offering options in those different ways. The next part here that's really central to UDL is minimizing barriers. And the emphasis here is that barriers exist in the environment, they don't exist in the student. Now, I know as a former teacher myself, there have been many times, especially earlier in my career, where I tried to fix the barrier in the learner. And what I discovered is that trying to change or fix, or whatever word you want to use, any barriers in learners is usually quite difficult to do. The much easier thing and the most just and equitable thing is to reduce the barrier in the environment itself. So, for example, let's say there's a student who is sitting at the back of the class and they can't see the board or what I'm projecting, right? I'm not going to, that's not a barrier in the student, their vision. It's a barrier in the environment. I'm going to move them to the front of the class, hopefully close enough that they can see the screen, right? That is the barrier in the environment, is their distance to the screen. Now, maybe I try that and there's still a barrier. They still can't see what's on the screen. Well, then I have to think about my design process again. Oh, perfect. We have the poll here. Go ahead and answer that. What is your familiarity with UDL? Um, then I need to think about a different design option, right? In that case, I've redesigned my environment once. Well, now maybe I need to offer them the resources on their computer, some type of digitally accessible way of accessing the content. All right, let's take a look at our votes here. We have mostly between none and some, so pretty minimal, which is great. That's always my favorite answer because it means that we have a lot to learn today. We have a lot. No UDL pros with us. All right. That's helpful information. Okay. We can dive in a little bit deeper then, just so everyone has a sense of this. Um, and here I'm really talking about what happens in the classroom, but keep in mind, and a lot of what we're sharing today is that UDL not only happens in classrooms, it happens in all environments as well. It happens in student support offices, it happens across leadership and management, it happens between professionals, it happens pretty much anywhere people are interacting with communication or education um, in some way. And finally, learner agency. What is learner agency? So the ultimate goal of UDL is a few things. When it comes to engagement, we want learners to be purposeful and reflective. So we want them to understand why they're learning what they're learning and to align that learning with their motivations, whatever that may be. And we also want them to think about what they're learning and how they're learning. Learner agency is really about becoming an expert learner, and I'll talk about the importance of that in a few minutes as well. But in order to become an expert learner, you have to reflect on your learning experiences and your learning itself. When it comes to representation, how they are perceiving that information and receiving that information, we want them to be resourceful. We want them to understand where do they go to get information and where do they go to understand that information in different ways. And we want them to be authentic as well with that information. So bringing themselves into that learning experience. And then finally, when it comes to action and expression, we want them to be strategic. So they're approaching learning in a strategic way. They're not just going through the motions of learning. They have a plan, they are anticipating things that might get in their way, and they have strategies for getting through that. And we want them to be action oriented as well. Um, all of this, it sounds a little theoretical, which is why we have the UDL guidelines. The UDL guidelines are concrete, specific ways to actually break down barriers in learning environments. Maria, if you could link that for folks as well, and we can take a minute to look at that. UDL guidelines are used by a wide variety of people. Educators are obviously a big group, but also curriculum directors, researchers, school leaders, parents, designers, ed tech designers, and more. I always like to say that this is great for relationships as well, for communicating with other people, and all of that. So let's actually take a look, just because people aren't super familiar with UDL. Let's take a look at the guidelines themselves. And I just want to highlight a few things for you. Drag this over here. So these are the UDL guidelines. This is the cheat sheet, basically, for UDL and how do you implement UDL. So you see these three columns here, right? These are the things that we are designing for. Engagement, which is a huge thing in education, always has been, probably always will be. Reaching those learners who are disengaged for one reason or another. What can we do to make sure that they are engaged in their learning? And the three broad categories here are to welcome their interests and identities, and there's a few specific ways that you can do that. That helps them access the learning. That's the first row. The second one is to support them. So when they're actually doing that learning and they encounter some of these barriers, like they're getting frustrated, they might not believe in themselves, they might have a history around, subjects like math, right? People often have some type of ego or lack of ego around math. And so these are the ways that we can support them in doing that. And then finally, executive function, which is a big one, always has been a big one, but I think in the future it's going to increasingly become important as we're kind of in this era of so many distractions and screens and things like that. How do we design options for emotional capacity? Um, Something important to note here is that this is not a checklist, right? So in your classroom, you don't have to optimize choice and autonomy, optimize relevance, clarify the meaning and purpose of the goal. You don't have to do all of these things necessarily. This is a toolkit that you can choose from, depending on your reflection of your own lesson design, right? So the first thing you want to think about is, where is the barrier in my lesson or in my experience? So for example, let's say you are a dean or management leadership of some capacity, and you're noticing that people aren't attending the regular meetings that you have. Maybe your once a month meeting with faculty, people aren't attending. So you decide to look at the design of the meetings and what is the barrier here? Is there a barrier to engagement? Is there a barrier to representation or action and expression? Well, I would say if people aren't attending the meeting in the first place, there's probably a barrier in engagement. People aren't understanding maybe the purpose of it. So maybe you need to optimize, you need to clarify the meaning and purpose of goals. You need to reset and think, okay, the goal of this meeting is X, Y, or Z. You need to give people a reason to come. Maybe the problem is that there's not really a point for the meeting and people are really wanting belonging and community, right? So then maybe um, you would use that as a resource. Nurture joy and play. This is a relatively new one for us, right? And super important when it comes to learning, like all experiences, but learning especially. Is there enough joy and play? We are playful creatures. We're only a few steps away from apes, right? So maybe it's a matter of joy and play. So that's just one example for you. In a classroom, right, you're doing a lot of these things at once, but that is your cheat sheet for UDL. And that's ultimately what we want educators to be thinking about. Um, all right, let's talk a little bit about UDL and community colleges and why I think it's so important in community colleges, especially. Um, Community colleges have the privilege of having the most variability in the college system in the United States, right? Of course, all colleges, all spaces in general have variability. That's just built into who we are as humans. But community colleges, variability is the mission, right? You want to have people who are working part-time or full-time. You want the parents who don't otherwise have access to education. You want people who might have financial instability, and are looking to get a degree or get a certification and work themselves up in society. You might have first generation folks, immigrants, veterans, a higher percentage of people with disabilities, right? That is the mission, and that's the amazing mission, is that variability. And UDL is fundamentally about variability. How do we support variability in these spaces? Another thing I'll say about community colleges is just the level of inspiring faculty and instructors that exist there. I certainly know from my college experience, a traditional four-year degree, a lot of faculty there, to speak broadly. Research is the main job, and then teaching is kind of this side responsibility that they have to do. The instruction and that happens in a community college, from what I've seen, it's so rich and purposeful. And UDL is the perfect complement for people who want to deliver quality instruction to such a wide uh, variability of people. So I think it aligns really well. And this is not a webinar in 2026, unless I talk about AI in one way or another. UDL in the age of AI is a whole nother level of importance. So as we know, AI is changing the skills that students need for tomorrow to the point where we're not really able to predict very well what are the skills for tomorrow. I remember growing up, the skills for tomorrow were using a computer. And now, really, I think the skills for tomorrow are about agency and expert learning. Because we might teach learners something today, and tomorrow AI is going to be able to do that and replicate that. And students will need to pivot and figure out what is their unique skill set, their uniquely human skill set that allows them to continually pivot, transform themselves, grow instead of being stuck in one type of niche that could be replaced by something like AI. So really UDL safeguards against that unknown future because it's teaching them how to be really expert learners, right? They know themselves and they know what they need in order to learn and grow as people. And that's something that, will never be phased out. Okay. Um, Happy to answer more questions about UDL stuff at the end. I do want to talk about our guide here, our UDL, our Universal Design for Learning implementation guide for community colleges. The goal of this, so I abbreviate it to UDLCC just because the name itself is quite long, so you might refer to it as the UDLCC. The goal of this is to help college teams, whatever that team is. It could, like I said, it could be college-wide. It could be department-wide. It could just be you and a few other faculty members, right? That's really up to you and what's available. The goal of it is to help those college teams implement UDL systemically and holistically, ideally beyond just that classroom environment. So Maria, if you could share the link to the, oh, great, you did in the chat here. So this is the entire guide that Maria put in the chat there. This will take you to Skill Commons, where there are many amazing resources. One of them, of course, being the UDL CC. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to give you an overview of all of the different pieces in this, and then the guide itself has more information and more guidance in there for you. If you want more guidance, more information, more resources, we do have some other pieces that we can offer you if this isn't enough. Certainly didn't want to overwhelm you with the amount of information. I think it's like 30 plus pages right now, but just let us know. So here is the overview. These are the different pieces of the guide itself. The first, mention this, is the self-assessment. This will help you understand where you're currently at with your implementation of UDL. And as you implement UDL over the years, it's going to help you monitor that progress and help you notice what are those areas of growth that I really need to tap into, and what are those areas that I'm already doing really well that I can brag about. So we'll do a quick, well, we're actually going to do a quick self-assessment in a second here. The second piece are the domains. So the domains are the broad categories where UDL can be implemented. Teaching and learning is the most obvious domain, right? UDL is about teaching and learning. But there's also other areas like student support or leadership and management. When UDL is embedded throughout all of the domains, that's when it is most powerful, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So that's what we're really shooting for, is integrating UDL across the whole system. And then finally is the planner. The planner is where you are identifying goals, identifying the metrics that you're going to use to track, and then what activities are going to support you in achieving those goals and increasing your metrics. But let's start with the self-assessment today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a modified version of the self-assessment. It's not going to go quite as in-depth as the actual self-assessment because that's going to take a little bit too much time for today. But really the self-assessment is measuring the current status of implementation. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, you might actually be doing some pieces already, even if you're not calling it UDL. You might be doing UDL. That was certainly my experience with UDL. Was I was using these different strategies in the classroom, and I didn't have a name for it. And then one day I stumbled upon UDL, and I realized that a lot of these things actually have names, resources, research behind it, and that was incredibly validating for me, right? Because then I have that support to understand that what I'm doing is actually effective. Self-assessment is also going to help you understand what you should focus on as a college or as an individual. And then from there, you can decide what data do you want to gather from that. Before we do the self-assessment, I want to share the various domains here with you. So these are the broad categories where UDL can be implemented. So they are college culture and environment, teaching and learning, leadership and management, professional learning, and student support. So Maria, if you have the next poll ready, I would love to get an understanding of which domain is your college's biggest strength and which domain is your college's biggest growth area. Now,
Okay,
I know you, yes.
Alex, so I did not set them all up in separate polls from this point forward. So I'm just going to relaunch the poll. And if you would answer questions 2 and 3 and not answer 4 for us, that way we can make sure that you've got the information you need in order to respond.
Okay,
So
let's
I'm
give it a
relaunching and answer questions 2 and 3, please. So question number 2 says, in which domain is your college's biggest strength?
It looks like four might be required, but I actually think you probably have enough information right now to maybe answer four. So I'm okay if people try to answer four. All right, getting a few results in here. Looks like strength right now is tied between teaching and learning and student support. In terms of growth opportunity, teaching and learning is also there, but so is leadership and management. I feel like no matter the context, if you put out a poll asking people what's the biggest growth opportunity in your organization, people are always going to say leadership and management. It's just one of those things. I think so. It looks like the student support domain is the biggest strength for most people, which is great because UDL is fundamentally about supporting students in one way or another. Right? Often we see that support happening in classrooms, but that support does need to be more holistic for the student. And then teaching and learning was also a big one, also on the other side of biggest growth opportunity, though, which is great. We love growth. Okay, I'm going to dive a little bit into the domains now, give you some more information about them. And as we go here, I will give you a chance to self-assess now that you know, or as you learn about the specific elements of the domains. So this whole process is data centered, right? When we are thinking about UDL implementation, we want people to think about the data that they have around UDL. The reason we do that primarily is for bias. Data is much harder to have bias around than just kind of our instincts or our feelings. Of course, there are ways to manipulate data and all of that. But we want this to be a data-focused cycle so that we can also track how well is UDL implementation working and at what point do we need to pivot. It's also important for stakeholders when you're sharing, hey, I invested in this framework, in this implementation, and I want to be able to show that it's working. So as we go through the domains, I want you to think about, do you have evidence that these domains are implemented in your context, whatever that context may be. If you want to think about on the level of department, you can do that. If you want to think about it on a higher level, like a college-wide environment, you can do that as well. So 0 to 4 points, 4 points being you have strong evidence that this is happening. Okay, domain number one, college culture and environment. Now, college culture is different than what, well, I remember when I was looking for colleges, what I was looking for in a college culture was very different than what we're defining here. So a UDL centered college culture and environment is defined this way. They've designed culture that supports inclusion and equity. They've designed a culture that supports expert learning. They communicate in ways that reflect a commitment to UDL, and they design college spaces to support variability. I think that the Vegas one here is communicate in ways that reflect a commitment to UDL. Like, what does that mean? Really, it's about everyone, including leadership, is communicating in ways that reflect variability. So if we're going back to the meeting analogy, we are sharing that meeting in a few different ways. We know that when it comes to emails, there's a huge amount of variability, even amongst professionals. Some people read every single line of every single email. Some people read none of their emails, right? We need to expect that variability and we need to communicate accordingly in multiple ways. That's just one example of many. So for this, give yourself a score, maybe on a notepad or something around you, 0 to 4, 4 being you have tons of evidence that you're doing these things, 0 being no evidence. That's the first one. Second one is teaching and learning. So are folks designing learning experiences using practices to address learner variability and reduce barriers? Are learning goals clear, flexible, meaningful, and do they support high expectations for all, right? Just because we are offering support to learners doesn't mean we're making things easier on them. We're actually able to increase the expectations for learners because we're ensuring that everyone can access that learning. Um, Incorporate flexible methods and materials that anticipate variability and reduce barriers, and flexible assessments that do the same thing. So clear, flexible goals, flexible methods and materials, and flexible assessments, kind of the big things there. Again, 0 to 4 points for yourself, 0 being no evidence, 1 being a little, 4 being very strong evidence. Leadership and management. Leadership and management, they lead, support, and monitor UDL implementation, right? So this is not just a matter of a college leader saying, you need to go do a UDL in your classroom. They are leading that, they are supporting that, and they are continually monitoring that UDL implementation to identify barriers that their own staff are experiencing so that they can help them. They are collaborating to design a systematic UDL implementation process. That is what this guide is for. That's what the planner is for. So hopefully that's a pretty easy one for people to check off down the road once they have access to this. They are collaborating to design processes, procedures, and structures to anticipate that variability and promote equity and expert learning, not just among students, but among their staff and faculty as well. And finally, they are procuring resources that align with UDL. They are doing some of that lifting themselves. They are not putting all of the emphasis on their teaching staff. As we know, when that happens, things tend to fall apart a little bit because people simply don't have time. They need that support in the same way that learners need the educator's support. Professional learning or professional development. Now, I know this gets a little bit tricky when we get into the college environment. Some people have budgets for this and time. Sometimes it's in contracts. Sometimes it's not. But ultimately, professional learning needs to be goal-driven, needs to be flexible. As always, right? That's going to be the biggest word you hear from me today is flexible to support, to address staff variability. It's going to support expert learning in the same way that we expect students to become expert learners. Our faculty and staff need to as well. And it integrates job embedded support, meaning it's not a one and done professional learning workshop. It's actually a part of their regular workflows that they can apply immediately to what they're doing. And finally, student support. So for student support, we need support services are proactive and accessible. So it's not just places that students can go when things have gone wrong. They are preventing bad things from happening in the first place, and they are accessible. That's both lowercase a accessible for people, but also uppercase a accessible for people with disabilities. The student support offices and faculty collaborate regularly. That's such an important relationship. They both have such unique perspectives over the learners, so they need to collaborate. Information is communicated in multiple formats, and student support systems are evaluated using data to identify gaps, reduce inequities, and improve access, just like we are doing with the UDL implementation itself. We're focusing on data to address these gaps. All right. Those are your 5 domains. You have a maximum of 20 points here. So we had 5 domains, maximum of 4 points in each domain. I'm not going to have you, I mean, if you want to, I suppose you can share your score in the chat, but I'm not going to make people do that for obvious reasons. All right, so if you scored 0 to 4 points on this. You are my future UDL stars. You have so much potential and growth ahead of you. There's so much that you can do in such a short time frame to bring your college and your instruction to the next level. This is perhaps the most exciting place to be because there is so much good work that can be had. So you are my future UDL stars um, right now. 5 to 9, you are my UDL adventurers. You are starting to dip your feet into the water, starting to do some UDL implementation, whether you call it that or not. You're doing the work. It's not fully implemented. It's not in all places all the time, but you're doing some things and hopefully starting to see the impacts of that that you can then double down on and do even more of. 10 to 15, UDL advocates. At this point, you have a pretty strong level of implementation across your campus or your department. You might even be advocating to other departments or other colleges about the value of UDL, and you're starting to really see the impact here. 15 to 19 are the UDL stars. You're what the future UDL stars look up to. That's where they're going to be in a couple of years as well. Really strong implementation and evidence of that implementation, and the impacts are very clear. It is inclusive learning. You are reaching people that you weren't able to reach before. And if you got 20 points, a perfect score, I think you probably just misunderstood the scoring system. It's very, very tough to get a perfect score on this. I'm not sure. Uh, there's a college out there who could get a 20, but if you believe you actually got a 20, we would love to hear from you and highlight you and learn from you and get your feedback on the guide because you're doing some really amazing work. I hope that in a few years, everyone here will be able to say that they are at a 20, and I'll be able to change this slide and say, look to this community college and this community college because they're rocking it. If you want to dive a little bit deeper into the self-assessment, it's going to have you go through each of these checkpoints one by one and give yourself a score. So it's going to give you a clearer sense of what are those areas that I need to focus on, or what areas should I be sharing with my leadership of like, hey, I just went to this webinar around UDL implementation. I did the self-assessment, and like, here's this thing that we're really not doing. All right, and I encourage you to share this guide widely with people as well. Okay, phases of implementation. I want to share this with you quickly and also give a little bit of time for Q&A here at the end. So 3 broad phases for implementation. We recommend this over 3 years, but again, thinking back to one of those earlier slides, take what you will from today and leave the rest. So maybe you're on more of a 4-year cycle, something longer, maybe even something shorter, depending, right? Make this work for you. But generally 3 years. First year is explore and prepare. You're understanding where you are currently implementing and what your growth areas are, and understanding what you're going to do, planning the next couple of years. Year 2 is about integrating. You're expanding implementation to more staff and more places. You're understanding what works and what doesn't, and shifting based on that. And then year 3 is scale, where you're really trying to scale it to the whole campus or department, and figuring out those really tricky areas that you haven't been able to solve yet. Every year you have these 3 components here. You're going to start with a problem of practice. So some type of problem that you are having that you haven't been able to solve yet. Um, for example, let's say you are looking at your data, right? This is all data driven, and you're noticing that your retention rates for first generation students is lower than what you would like it to be. Okay, that's your problem of practice. Your goal then is you want to increase retention via some inclusion initiatives, and maybe some increased use of support, with the metric being a few things. Retention percentage, of course, is important, but you might also use some other flexible methods, or qualitative methods, surveys. You might want to look at the office hour attendance or whatever other support you are embedding. Look at some data around those. And then finally is the activity. So what are you doing that supports you achieving those goals? That might be a journey mapping session. That might be a UDL guidelines deep dive. That might be creating a community of practice amongst faculty. Um, there's so many different things that you could do for that. And Those are all listed in the guide itself, as well as some additional explanation about what is a problem of practice, what's a goal, what's a metric, all of that. So year one, I'm just going to speak broadly here about these phases, and I'll let you dig into the guide a little bit more as you need to, is explore and prepare. So this year, you're going to create a UDL leadership team. These are the people who will be leading this implementation, deciding a lot of what happens, identifying those strengths and growth areas, aligning any existing initiatives that you might have to this, and planning implementation. This is where you have a lot of your early adopters as well starting to do UDL. Year two, you're expanding beyond those early adopters into more of your staff. Figure that we roughly quote as 50% of your staff or your faculty. You are expanding implementation and you're monitoring that data and making adjustments based on what that data is looking like and if your original plan is working. You're not creating a plan on day one with this and you're sticking with it the whole 3 years. This is a flexible process. There's that word again, flexibility, right? That's the focus. If you take anything away from today, it's flexibility, variability. Year three is scale. You are expanding implementation to most of your staff, continuing to monitor that data and make adjustments, and starting to solve for some of those trickiest barriers that you haven't been able to solve yet. All right. So I told you already, what's your next step? A lot of people said they're going to take the self-assessment, which is great. All of this is in one single document. So that self-assessment, you can take that, figure out where you're at with it. Other people said they might bring this resource to some of their leadership. That's great as well. There's a lot of different ways that you can work with this. For other folks, if that's not your sphere of influence or something you want to do, it might be learning more about UDL on your own, maybe bookmarking the UDL guidelines. That's a great start, right? Next time you feel stuck with a lesson or with a specific learner, take a glance at the UDL guidelines and see if there's something there, right? I always keep it on my desk right next to me, just as helpful reminder, like address biases in the use of language and symbols, right? How many times in a day are we assuming that students know what symbols we're using? Um, Probably a lot. So stuff like that, right? Take a glance at it every now and then, see what happens, and then over the years, maybe you can work up to a wider UDL implementation. Okay, that was a lot of information. We have a Q&A coming up here. Before the Q&A, I just want to remind people of a couple things. One are these upcoming webinars. I'll leave this up for a minute here. You can sign. So there is a second one of these UDL statewide implementation sessions. It's going to be more or less the same as this one. You are welcome to attend if you want a second go at some of this information. And then we also have these other webinars, recruitment strategies, marketing toolkit, and OER as well. Maria, I know you had an announcement as well that you wanted to share with folks, if you want to chime in with that.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Nice job today. And the thing that I always, I've been a follower of UDL for years now, and I certainly would not consider myself in the 20 range. There's just a lot of practice that goes along with it. But the thing that I love about it so much is that UDL is not just for the learner, it's also for the instructor. It's also for the leader. It's for anybody who's working with their own learning, with their own professional development, and with others who are doing the same. So, as a department head or as a CAO, as a senior advisor of any kind, these are all skills that really come into play, and I can use on a daily basis. So, we hope that you'll think about it like that as well. The other piece that is a little bit hard for us is knowing how to better support you because we don't always hear. We don't have boots on the ground there. We're all over the country. This team is put together from people from the East Coast to the West, down in Dallas, all over the place. Andy and I are in Colorado, and so in order to know how to best support you, we have developed, and Alex, I'm going to ask that you stop sharing for a moment so I can share my screen.
Go ahead.
And thank you. We've developed this little tracking tool, and I have put the link to this Google Doc in the chat for you. I've also put a downloaded copy of it if you prefer to do that and not have your name posted into the Google Doc. That's okay too. If you want to just send that to me after you have added some notes. So just the top three are just examples of how you might use this. And this helps us to understand a little bit better about who's using it, what kinds of ways in which the UDL practices are being implemented, and what is it that we can do to help you? What other resources might you need? What kind of observations are you seeing as you start to pull pieces out and put them into your lesson planning and into your LMS tools? So we're going to be asking people to use this particular tool, the same tool for all of the webinar content that we are sharing over the next few months. And so it will be available. It will be open and available for you to add your notes to through September. So we hope that you will continue to do that. Okay, and that's what I had, Alex. Thanks for giving me a second for that.
Yeah, thank you. You reminded me as well of the educator guide for this work as well that we created, especially for OACC. So I put that in the chat as well for those educators who indicated that they were coming today to learn more about UDL in their own classroom. That's a guide that is a little bit more broken down from the guidelines, which I know can be a lot and sometimes a little bit overwhelming. You kind of put the highest leverage practices that we thought would be applicable for you in that. So hopefully that's a helpful resource for you all as well. Um, all right, I will be on here. If you have any questions for me, feel free to put them in the chat or come off mic. If you have to get going, that's fine too. I hope you enjoy your hopefully sunny afternoon there in Ohio, and really appreciate you coming and hope this guide is useful for you. But I will take any questions in the meantime. My email is on the screen there if you want to follow up with anything. More than happy to chat.
Thanks, Alex. I'll just say I'm here. I work with Alex. And I would just add, I just important for people to just, it can feel like a lot, but just to really keep a mentality of like, start small, think about something that's very aligned with your goals, that's sort of a high leverage practice because it's really aligned with your goals in terms of what you want students to learn, what you see as sort of primary challenges. And then that tends to spiral up, so you kind of pick one or two things out of these guidelines, out of this work that you're like, I really feel like motivation's a big issue. Maybe I'm going to try this issue of reducing distractions, right? Reducing things that might feel threatening to your students. And go with that and move a little further, right? Or pick something in the area of maybe I'm going to broaden out how I go about measuring whether they've understood or built a new skill. Or I'm going to think about how I represent the information that my students get. So start small and know that it really does spiral up. And once you've started one thing and you feel like you've mastered it, you can take on another. But there's no expectation for you to do all of this all at once.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, my dog will be happy. She's lying at my feet right now, begging for a walk. Um, see you all later.
Thanks again, Alex. You guys do a nice job. We appreciate you.